Abraham, originally named Abram, is a central figure in the Hebrew Bible, revered as the founding patriarch of the Israelites, Ishmaelites, Edomites, and Midianites. His story is one of faith, obedience, and covenant with God. This narrative will explore the life of Abraham as described in the Bible, particularly in the book of Genesis. The call of Abram. Abram was born in the city of Ur in Mesopotamia. He was the son of Terah and had two brothers, Nahor and Haran. Haran fathered Lot before dying in Ur. Abram married Sarai, who was barren and unable to have children. Terah took Abram, Sarai, and Lot and set out for Canaan but settled in Haran, where Terah died. After Terah's death, the Lord spoke to Abram, commanding him to leave his country, his people, and his father's household and go to the land that he would show him. The Lord promised to make Abram into a great nation, bless him, make his name great, and make him a blessing to others. Abram obeyed and, at the age of 75, left Haran with Sarai, Lot, and all their possessions, heading to Canaan. Arrival in Canaan. Abram traveled through the land of Canaan to Shechem, where the Lord appeared to him and promised to give the land to his descendants. Abram built an altar there to the Lord. He then moved to the hill country east of Bethel and pitched his tent, with Bethel on the west and Ai on the east. There he built another altar and called on the name of the Lord. A severe famine struck the land, forcing Abram to go down to Egypt to live. Fearing that the Egyptians would kill him to take Sarai, who was very beautiful, he asked her to say she was his sister. Indeed, Pharaoh took Sarai into his palace and treated Abram well because of her. But the Lord inflicted serious diseases on Pharaoh and his household because of Sarai. When Pharaoh realized Sarai was Abram's wife, he summoned Abram and rebuked him for his deception, then sent him away with Sarai and all his belongings. Abram and Lot separate. Abram returned to Canaan, wealthy in livestock, silver, and gold. He went back to Bethel, where he had first built an altar, and called on the name of the Lord. Lot, who was traveling with Abram, also had flocks, herds, and tents. The land could not support both Abram and Lot's possessions, and their herders began quarreling. Abram proposed they separate to avoid conflict, giving Lot the first choice of land. Lot chose the fertile plain of the Jordan and settled near the wicked city of Sodom, while Abram settled in Canaan. The Lord reiterated his promise to Abram, telling him to look in every direction and affirming that all the land he saw would be given to his descendants forever. The Lord also promised that Abram's offspring would be as numerous as the dust of the earth. Abram moved his tents and settled near the great trees of Mamre at Hebron, where he built another altar to the Lord. Abram rescues Lot. A war broke out in the region, involving several kings, including the king of Sodom. The invaders captured Lot and his possessions and left. When Abram heard this, he gathered 318 trained men born in his household and pursued the invaders. He attacked them by night, defeated them, and recovered all the goods, along with Lot and his possessions, the women, and the other people. Upon his return, Abram was greeted by Melchizedek, king of Salem and priest of God Most High, who blessed Abram and brought out bread and wine. Abram gave Melchizedek a tenth of everything. The king of Sodom offered Abram the recovered goods, but Abram refused, not wanting the king of Sodom to say he had made Abram rich. Instead, Abram accepted only what his men had eaten and the share that belonged to his allies. The covenant with Abram. Sometime later, the Lord spoke to Abram in a vision, assuring him not to be afraid and promising to be his shield and great reward. Abram voiced his concern about being childless, as he had no heir except for a servant, Eliezer of Damascus. The Lord reassured Abram that his own flesh and blood would be his heir, and took him outside to look at the stars, promising that his offspring would be as numerous. The Lord then confirmed his covenant with Abram. He instructed Abram to bring a heifer, a goat, and a ram, each 3 years old, along with a dove and a young pigeon. Abram cut the animals in two and arranged the halves opposite each other, but did not cut the birds. As the sun was setting, Abram fell into a deep sleep, and a thick and dreadful darkness came over him. The Lord foretold that Abram's descendants would be strangers in a foreign land, enslaved and mistreated for 400 years, but would later come out with great possessions. After the sun had set and darkness had fallen, A smoking fire pot with a blazing torch appeared and passed between the pieces. The Lord made a covenant with Abram that day, promising to give his descendants the land from the Wadi of Egypt to the great river, the Euphrates. Hagar and Ishmael. Sarai, still childless, suggested that Abram have a child with her Egyptian maidservant, Hagar. Abram agreed, and Hagar conceived. Once Hagar knew she was pregnant, she began to despise Sarai. Sarai mistreated Hagar, causing her to flee. However, an angel of the Lord found Hagar near a spring in the desert and instructed her to return and submit to Sarai. The angel also promised that Hagar's descendants would be too numerous to count and that she would bear a son named Ishmael, meaning God hears. Hagar returned to Abram and Sarai and gave birth to Ishmael when Abram was 86 years old. The covenant of circumcision. When Abram was 99 years old, the Lord appeared to him and reaffirmed his covenant, changing Abram's name to Abraham, meaning father of many nations, and Sarai's name to Sarah. The Lord promised that Sarah would bear a son, and they were to name him Isaac. The Lord also instituted the covenant of circumcision as a sign of this everlasting covenant. Every male in Abraham's household, including slaves, was to be circumcised, and every male descendant was to be circumcised at 8 days old. Abraham immediately obeyed, circumcising himself, his son Ishmael, and every male in his household. The three visitors. One day, while Abraham was sitting at the entrance to his tent near the great trees of Mamre, he saw 3 men standing nearby. Recognizing them as divine visitors, he hurried to greet them, bowed low to the ground, and offered them hospitality. He had Sarah prepare bread, a servant prepare a choice calf, and brought curds and milk for them. While they ate, one of the visitors promised that Sarah would have a son by that time next year. Sarah, who was listening at the entrance of the tent, laughed to herself, thinking she was too old to have a child. The Lord, knowing her thoughts, asked Abraham why Sarah laughed and reiterated that nothing was too hard for the Lord. Sarah, afraid, denied laughing, but the Lord insisted she did. Abraham pleads for Sodom. As the visitors prepared to leave, they looked toward Sodom, and the Lord shared with Abraham his plan to investigate the outcry against Sodom and Gomorrah's wickedness. Abraham, concerned for his nephew Lot, who lived in Sodom, boldly interceded, asking if the Lord would spare the city if 50 righteous people were found there. The Lord agreed. Abraham continued to plead, reducing the number to 45, 40, 30, 20, and finally 10. The Lord assured Abraham that he would not destroy the city if 10 righteous people were found there. The destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah. 2 of the visitors, now identified as angels, arrived in Sodom in the evening. Lot, sitting at the city gate, greeted them and insisted they stay at his house. The angels agreed, but before they could settle in for the night, all the men of Sodom surrounded the house, demanding to have relations with the visitors. Lot pleaded with them to do no such wicked thing, and even offered his 2 virgin daughters instead. The mob refused and tried to break down the door. The angels pulled Lot back inside, struck the men with blindness, and instructed Lot to gather his family and leave the city. Lot's sons-in-law thought he was joking and stayed behind. At dawn, the angels urged Lot to hurry, taking his wife and 2 daughters by the hand and leading them out of the city. The angels instructed them to flee to the mountains and not look back or stop anywhere in the plain. Lot asked to flee to the small town of Zoar instead, and the angels granted his request. As soon as Lot reached Zoar, the Lord rained down burning sulfur on Sodom and Gomorrah, destroying all the inhabitants and vegetation. Lot's wife looked back and became a pillar of salt. The next morning, Abraham returned to the spot where he had pleaded with the Lord and saw the dense smoke rising from the land. The birth of Isaac. The Lord was gracious to Sarah, as he had promised, and she conceived and bore a son to Abraham in his old age, at the very time God had promised. Abraham named his son Isaac, meaning he laughs, and circumcised him when he was 8 days old, as God had commanded. Sarah declared that God had brought her laughter, and everyone who heard about Isaac's birth would laugh with her. Isaac grew, and on the day he was weaned, Abraham held a great feast. However, Sarah saw Ishmael mocking Isaac and demanded that Abraham send Hagar and Ishmael away. Abraham was distressed, but God told him to listen to Sarah, assuring him that Isaac would be the one through whom Abraham's offspring would be reckoned, but that he would also make Ishmael into a nation because he was Abraham's offspring. Hagar and Ishmael sent away. Early the next morning, Abraham took some food and a skin of water and gave them to Hagar. He set them on her shoulders and sent her away with Ishmael. Hagar wandered in the desert of Beersheba, and when the water was gone, she put Ishmael under one of the bushes and sat nearby, unable to watch him die. She wept, and God heard the boy crying. An angel of God called to Hagar from heaven and reassured her, telling her to lift the boy up and take him by the hand, for God would make him into a great nation. God opened Hagar's eyes, and she saw a well of water. She went and filled the skin with water and gave Ishmael a drink. God was with Ishmael as he grew up. He lived in the desert and became an archer. While living in the desert of Paran, his mother found him a wife from Egypt. The treaty at Beersheba. At that time, Abimelech, king of Gerar, and his commander Phicol approached Abraham, recognizing that God was with him in everything he did. They asked Abraham to swear an oath not to deal falsely with them or their descendants, and to show the same kindness to them that they had shown to him. Abraham agreed and complained about a well of water that Abimelech's servants had seized. Abimelech claimed he was unaware of the incident and had heard about it only that day. Abraham then gave sheep and cattle to Abimelech, and the two men made a treaty. Abraham set apart 7 ewe lambs, and when Abimelech asked about their significance, Abraham explained that they were a witness that he had dug the well. The place was called Beersheba, meaning well of the oath, because the two men swore an oath there. After the treaty was made, Abimelech and Phicol returned to the land of the Philistines. Abraham planted a tamarisk tree in Beersheba and called on the name of the Lord, the eternal God. He stayed in the land of the Philistines for a long time. The sacrifice of Isaac. Sometime later, God tested Abraham. He called to him, and Abraham responded, "Here I am." God then instructed Abraham to take his only son Isaac, whom he loved, to the region of Moriah and sacrifice him there as a burnt offering on a mountain he would show him. Early the next morning, Abraham saddled his donkey, took 2 of his servants and his son Isaac, and set out for the place God had told him about. On the 3rd day, Abraham saw the place in the distance. He told his servants to stay with the donkey while he and Isaac went to worship, saying they would return. Abraham took the wood for the burnt offering and placed it on Isaac, while he himself carried the fire and the knife. As they walked together, Isaac asked his father where the lamb for the burnt offering was. Abraham replied that God himself would provide the lamb. When they reached the place God had told him about, Abraham built an altar and arranged the wood on it. He bound Isaac and laid him on the altar, on top of the wood. Then he reached out his hand and took the knife to slay his son. But the angel of the Lord called out to him from heaven, "Abraham, Abraham." Abraham replied, "Here I am." The angel instructed him not to lay a hand on the boy or do anything to him. For now God knew that Abraham feared him, since he had not withheld his only son. Abraham looked up and saw a ram caught by its horns in a thicket. He went over, took the ram, and sacrificed it as a burnt offering instead of his son. Abraham called the place, "The Lord will provide," and to this day, it is said, "On the mountain of the Lord it will be provided." The angel of the Lord called to Abraham from heaven a second time and reiterated God's promise to bless him and make his descendants as numerous as the stars in the sky and the sand on the seashore. Through Abraham's offspring, all nations on earth would be blessed because he had obeyed God. The death of Sarah. Sarah lived to be 127 years old. She died in Kiriath Arba, Hebron, in the land of Canaan. Abraham mourned for her and wept over her. He then approached the Hittites, the people of the land, and asked them to sell him property for a burial site. They recognized Abraham as a mighty prince and offered him the choicest of their tombs. Abraham insisted on paying the full price and negotiated with Ephron son of Zohar, who owned the cave of Machpelah at the end of his field. They agreed on a price of 400 shekels of silver, and Abraham weighed out the silver according to the weight current among the merchants. He bought the field and the cave and buried Sarah there. The field and the cave became Abraham's property, and it was thus confirmed in the presence of the Hittites. A wife for Isaac. Abraham was now very old, and the Lord had blessed him in every way. He called his senior servant, the one in charge of all he had, and made him swear by the Lord, the God of heaven and earth, not to get a wife for Isaac from the Canaanites, but to go to his country and his own relatives and get a wife for Isaac. The servant asked what he should do if the woman was unwilling to come back with him, and Abraham assured him that the Lord would send his angel before him so that he could find a wife for Isaac there. If the woman was unwilling to come, the servant would be released from his oath. The servant took 10 of Abraham's camels and set out, taking with him all kinds of good things from his master. He went to the town of Nahor in Aram Naharaim and had the camels kneel down near the well outside the town. It was evening, the time when women go out to draw water. The servant prayed to the Lord, asking for success, and that the woman who offered to give him and his camels water would be the one the Lord had chosen for Isaac. Before he had finished praying, Rebekah came out with her jar on her shoulder. She was very beautiful and a virgin. She went down to the spring, filled her jar, and came up again. The servant ran to meet her and asked for a drink. She gave him a drink and then offered to draw water for his camels as well. The servant watched her closely, silently praying for confirmation that she was the one. After the camels had finished drinking, the servant gave her a gold nose ring and 2 gold bracelets and asked about her family. She revealed that she was the daughter of Bethuel, the son of Milcah, who was the wife of Abraham's brother Nahor. The servant bowed down and worshipped the Lord, praising him for his unfailing kindness and faithfulness to Abraham. He went to Rebekah's home, where her brother Laban welcomed him. The servant recounted his mission and how the Lord had led him to Rebekah. Her family recognized the Lord's hand in the matter and agreed to the marriage. The next morning, the servant asked to return to his master, but Rebekah's family wanted her to stay for 10 days. The servant insisted on leaving immediately, and they called Rebekah to ask her. She agreed to go, and they blessed her, saying, "Our sister, may you increase to thousands upon thousands. May your offspring possess the cities of their enemies." Rebekah and her maids got ready and mounted the camels to go with the servant. Isaac was living in the Negev and had gone out to the field one evening to meditate. When he looked up, he saw camels approaching. Rebekah also looked up, saw Isaac, and asked the servant who he was. The servant replied that it was his master, so she took her veil and covered herself. The servant told Isaac everything he had done, and Isaac brought Rebekah into the tent of his mother Sarah and married her. She became his wife, and he loved her, and Isaac was comforted after his mother's death. Abraham's death. Abraham took another wife, named Keturah, who bore him 6 sons: Zimran, Jokshan, Medan, Midian, Ishbak, and Shua. Jokshan was the father of Sheba and Dedan, whose descendants became known as the Asherites, Letushites, and Lumites. The sons of Midian were Ephah, Epher, Hanok, Abida, and Eldah. Abraham gave everything he owned to Isaac, but provided gifts for the sons of his concubines, and sent them away from Isaac to the land of the east. Abraham lived a total of 175 years. He died at a good old age, an old man and full of years, and was gathered to his people. His sons Isaac and Ishmael buried him in the cave of Machpelah near Mamre, in the field of Ephron son of Zohar the Hittite, the same field Abraham had bought as a burial place from the Hittites. After Abraham's death, God blessed his son Isaac, who then lived near Beer Lahai Roi.